Who is that woman? Why does she have my face? Why is my husband kissing her? That's my husband. That's my life. Look at me. Please. Please look at me. I'm Larkin. I'm his wife. Please tell me my life. Please somebody tell me what's happening.
Hush now. You're just a patient with a vivid imagination. Mr. Ashcombe's wife is exactly where she belongs, at the gala, by his side. You are no one.
What do you mean? I need to get out of here now! Can anybody hear me? Open this door! Please!
Larkin, your mother is behind every part of your downfall.
Imagine waking up after 6 months in a coma and finding that your entire life is still running without you. Same face in the mirror they hold up for you. Same eyes, same voice. A stranger wearing you so well that no one in your own house ever noticed you were gone. And the second blow, the one that still takes my breath away even now, is that my own mother is the reason I was gone at all. My name is Larkin Ashcombe, and if you are watching this story, I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of it. Most of the time, the people you believe are your most cherished people in your life can turn out to be your biggest enemy in disguise. My first morning back in my own body, if you could call it that, was nothing like what came a day later. That first morning, I could barely lift my own hand off the blanket, let alone make sense of where I was. I drifted in and out, weak and confused, and the nurses who came and went told me almost nothing beyond the basics, that I had been asleep a long time, that I needed rest. I didn't yet understand that the room I was lying in wasn't an ordinary hospital room at all. It was a locked private wing, sealed off from the rest of the hospital, the kind of place built for patients who were never meant to be found, not for ordinary recovery. It was the next day, with a little more strength finally returning to my body, that everything broke open at once. I woke fully this time, jerked upright before I even understood why, and turned toward the television mounted high on the wall. On the screen, my husband was smiling, leaning down to kiss another woman, a woman wearing my exact face. The color drained out of me first. Then my lips started trembling, and then the panic simply exploded. I threw the blanket aside and stumbled off the bed, unable to look away from the screen. Who is that woman?
Who is that
I heard
woman?
myself say, my voice cracking apart as it left me.
Why does she have my face?
Why does she have my face?
Why is my husband
Why is my
kissing her?
husband kissing
That's
her?
my husband.
That's my husband.
That's my life.
That's my life. A nurse
Look at
walked
me.
in without a trace of
Please.
emotion on her face,
look at me.
and I went
I'm
straight
Larkin,
for
I'm
her,
his wife.
grabbing both of her hands,
tell me my
tears
life.
already
Please
streaming
somebody
down
tell
my
me what's
face.
happening.
Look at me, I begged her. Please, look at me. I'm Larkin Ashcombe. I'm his wife. Tell me why another woman is living my life. Tell me what's happening. She pulled her hands free from mine, slowly, her expression never once changing. Hush now, she said. You're just a patient with a vivid imagination. Mr. Ashcombe's wife is exactly where she belongs, at the gala, by his side. You are no one. Then she turned and walked out, and didn't look back once. I stood there frozen for a moment before something in me finally moved. What do you mean? I said to the empty room. I need to get out of here now. I ran for the door and yanked at it, but it didn't give. A heavy security lock held it shut, the same lock that should have told me everything about where I really was. I pounded both fists against it, over and over, screaming until my throat gave out. Can anybody hear me? Open this door, please. Then a figure stepped into the doorway. Someone I had spent years of my life trying to avoid. Someone I had once called, without exaggeration, the worst person from my entire childhood. She didn't smile at me. She didn't apologize for being there. She crossed the room, leaned down close enough that her voice could only reach me and no one else, and she whispered 5 words I will never stop hearing. Larkin, your mother is behind every part of your downfall. 5 words, and every assumption I had ever made about my own family quietly came apart. This is the story of Larkin Ashcombe, a woman who clawed her way back from a 6-month coma, only to discover that the people closest to her had spent every single day of her absence proving they were never truly on her side at all. Before we go further into how this happened, here is what you need to hold on to. A woman who looked exactly like Larkin Ashcombe had been living inside her marriage, her home, and her public life for 6 months, attending events at her husband's side, answering to her name, and convincing an entire political world that nothing was wrong. The first question worth asking is simple. How does a stranger replace a wife so completely that not one person closest to her raises an alarm? The second question is harder. If Larkin's own mother was behind the plan, how long had she been planning it, and how far back did the betrayal actually start? There is a third question sitting underneath both of those, quieter, but in many ways the one that hurts the most. Why would a mother choose to erase one daughter in favor of another? Over the next several minutes, you are going to meet a woman named Delphine Voss, a mother capable of more calculation and more patience than most people manage in an entire lifetime, and you are going to understand exactly why she believed Larkin was never worth keeping in the first place. Stay with us, because nothing about this story unfolds the way you expect it to. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand how Larkin ended up in that hospital bed, you have to go back almost 3 decades to a dining room inside a Virginia estate called Linden Hall, where a 9-year-old girl was learning, one quiet dinner at a time, that love in her family was something you earned and never something you were simply given. Larkin had just come home from a recitation competition, a poem she had practiced for weeks, and she had won. She set the small ribbon on the table beside her mother's plate, hoping, the way children hope, that this would be the night Delphine finally looked at her the way other mothers looked at their daughters. Delphine looked at the ribbon, then at Larkin, and set down her fork. "Sometimes I look at you and wonder if I really did go through labor for you myself," she said, "because nothing about you looks like it belongs to me. You're too dull, too cold. You can't even fight your own battles when the other girls corner you at school. You are nothing like this bloodline. No one in this family has ever been as soft as you." Larkin didn't cry at the table. She had already learned, even at 9, that crying in front of her mother only gave Delphine more to be disappointed by. She remembers, even now, exactly what she told herself underneath that table, her small hands folded tightly in her lap. Don't let her see it land. It would become the sentence Larkin repeated to herself for the next 20 years, every single time her mother found a new way to remind her she was not enough. It would be wrong to say Larkin never cried over any of it. She did, just never where her mother could see it land as a victory. There was one night, at 15, after Delphine compared her unfavorably to a cousin in front of the entire family at a holiday dinner, when Larkin locked her bedroom door, sat down on the floor of her closet, and sobbed until her whole body ached, pressing both hands over her mouth so the sound wouldn't carry down the hallway. She has never told anyone, until now, that she kept a small notebook hidden under her mattress where she wrote down every cruel thing her mother ever said to her, not to remember the pain, but to prove to herself, on the nights she needed proof, that she hadn't imagined any of it. There was one evening, not long after, when Delphine crouched down to Larkin's eye level in the hallway outside her bedroom, her voice softer than usual, which somehow made the words land harder. "Sweetheart, look at me. You are too gentle for this family. Too quiet. You let the other girls at school corner you, and you never once fight back," Larkin asked her, in the small, hopeful voice of a child who still believed there was a version of herself that could fix this, what she was supposed to do instead. Delphine told her plainly, the words landing exactly the way she intended them to. "The day you finally start acting like a true Voss is the day I will consider you fully mine." Larkin asked the only question she had left. What if I never become that person? What if I'm just me? Her mother didn't answer. She simply stood and walked away, and the silence that followed was the only answer Larkin would ever get. What Larkin would not understand until she was much older was where that coldness in her mother had actually come from. Delphine had grown up in a far smaller house, raised by a father who blamed her for every hardship in his life after her own mother walked out on both of them when Delphine was only 5 years old. "Be useful," he told her, more times than she could count. "Be something meaningful to this family, or you'll end up exactly like she did." The drinking got worse as the years went on, and so did everything that came with it. There were nights her father came home already unsteady on his feet, and on those nights, Delphine learned to read the sound of his footsteps on the porch before he even reached the door. He called her a burden more than once, told her she was too much responsibility for a man trying to hold a family together alone.
You think
I asked for this?
You think I wanted
He
to be
told her
stuck
one
raising a
night,
child your
drunk
mother
and
didn't even
furious
want?
over money that wasn't there. You think I wanted to be stuck raising a child your mother didn't even want? There was one night, after a particularly bad loss at cards, that he hit her hard enough to split her lip. Then he put her out of the house entirely, locking the door behind her and leaving her to sit on the porch steps until sunrise before he let her back in without a single word of apology. Delphine took her father's words seriously in a way he never expected her to. By 14, she was working whatever jobs a girl that age could find, handing over most of what she earned just to keep the lights on and a small bit of food on the table that he too often gambled away before it ever got there. She told herself, more than once, that if being useful was the only way to be loved in that house, she would simply become the most useful thing in it. By the time Delphine turned 20, she had built herself entirely around that single sentence, and at 22, her father arranged her marriage to a man named Garrick Sumner, chosen for his money rather than his character. What Delphine did not learn until years later was the real reason her father had pushed her into that marriage. Her father owed Garrick a considerable gambling debt, the kind of debt a man like him had no real way of repaying, and the marriage was less an introduction than a settlement. Garrick never let her forget it. "Your father handed you to me to clear his own debt," he told her once, early in the marriage, with no anger in his voice at all, only fact. "I didn't choose you. I collected you." It was the root of nearly everything that came after. The maltreatment, the word worthless he used on her more times than she could count, because in his mind, she had never been a wife he wanted. She had been a debt he was owed. The marriage turned cruel within the first year. Garrick was not a man who raised his voice to control a room. He was quieter than that, and somehow far more frightening for it. "You will learn your place in this house," he told her once, calm as a closed door, "the same way I learned mine." He called her a failure more times than she could count, the same word her own father had already used against her for years, and for a long time, she believed them both. Delphine endured years of that quiet cruelty before something in her finally hardened into resolve instead of fear. She spent months gathering what she needed, carefully and without a single outburst, until she had enough evidence to see Garrick sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison, and enough legal groundwork already laid to take every asset that had ever carried his name and move it fully into hers. It was from the wreckage of that marriage that Delphine rebuilt the Voss name into one of the most respected political dynasties in the country, and it was from that same wreckage that she formed the only philosophy she would ever fully believe in. She said it once, to no one in particular, the week she finally walked out of that house for good. "I did not survive him so that I could go on and raise something fragile." Larkin never heard that sentence from her mother's own mouth. She pieced it together years later, document by document, and by the time she understood it, it explained everything about the way she had been raised and forgave absolutely none of it. Larkin's life did not stay cold forever, At 26, at a fundraiser in Georgetown, a tall, easygoing man named Thatcher Ashcombe spilled an entire glass of champagne down the sleeve of her dress and refused to let his apology end with a single sentence. "I have given longer apologies for smaller crimes than this one," he told her, already reaching for a napkin. "Let me at least get your name before I ruin the rest of your evening." She told him it was Larkin and that he was forgiven, barely. It was the first time in longer than she could remember that she had laughed without first checking whether it was safe to. Their courtship moved quickly and warmly, late dinners and longer phone calls, and within months, Thatcher's father, Senator Bennett Ashcombe, had welcomed Larkin into the family with a warmth her own mother had never once offered her. Thatcher told her plainly, more than once, that he had shaken hands with senators who unsettled him less than the idea of spending one single night without her beside him. For the first time in her life, someone had looked directly at her softness and called it a reason to stay rather than a reason to leave. "It is," Larkin still says, "the single truest piece of love she has ever known, and it is the reason what came later hurt as deeply as it did." There was a small ritual between them that began early and never once changed. Every night, no matter how the day had gone, Thatcher would find her wherever she was in the house, press his forehead to hers, and whisper the same 4 words against her skin. "Still my favorite room." It made no sense to anyone but the two of them. A joke from their second date about a tiny apartment she once loved, and Larkin always answered it the same way, every single time, without fail. "Then stay in it." It was the kind of thing two people build only after years of choosing each other on purpose, and neither of them ever imagined it would matter to anyone beyond their own marriage. Larkin herself never dressed for attention the way some of the wives in Thatcher's political circle did. She kept her style quiet and exact, tailored neutrals, a single strand of pearls, soft makeup that never tried to compete with her, the kind of elegance people described as old money, even though her money had never been old at all. Thatcher used to tell her that her restraint was the loudest thing in any room she walked into. At the engagement dinner, Delphine raised her glass and offered a toast that sounded, to every other guest in the room, like a mother's pride. To Larkin, the one good decision in a lifetime of careful ones. There was no warmth in her mother's face when she said it, and Larkin noticed, the way she always noticed, and chose, the way she always chose, to hear it as a compliment anyway. She had spent her entire life translating her mother's cruelty into something soft enough to survive, and this was simply one more sentence she folded carefully into that same old shape. It was not long after the wedding that Delphine began inserting herself into Larkin's medical care, gently at first, then with a kind of insistence that felt, to Larkin, like protection rather than control. "You'll go nowhere else for your appointments," Delphine told her one afternoon, already making the call herself. "I built that hospital. I trust it with my own life, and I will trust it with yours." Larkin read this, at the time, as the closest her mother had ever come to tenderness. She had no way of knowing, not yet, that she was not being protected at all. She was being catalogued. The night everything changed began ordinarily enough. Larkin had just left a political fundraiser in downtown Washington, the kind of evening she had attended dozens of times before without a second thought, and she was driving the quiet roads back toward home when her phone lit up with a call from a number she did not recognize. She would never get the chance to find out who it was. What she carried with her that night, known to no one yet, not even Thatcher, was a piece of news she had only confirmed that same afternoon and was still deciding how to tell him. Within seconds, her car left the road, and the life she had known up to that point ended without a single moment of warning. Earlier that same evening, before any of it happened, Thatcher had pulled her aside into a quiet corner of the fundraiser, away from the noise, just to dance with her for 30 seconds to no music at all, his hand at the small of her back, his forehead dropping to hers the way it always did. "You're distracted tonight," he murmured against her skin. "Good distracted or bad distracted?" She had only smiled and told him she would tell him everything the second they got home, that some news deserved a quiet house and his full attention, not a ballroom full of strangers. He never got the chance to hear it. What happened next is not something Larkin remembers clearly, and out of respect for her and for the family she eventually had to face afterward, this story will not dwell on the details of that night beyond what matters. By the time help reached her, Larkin Ashcombe was already gone from the world she had known, pulled from consciousness into a coma that would hold her for 6 full months, while everyone she loved was told to prepare for the worst. What the public did not know, what even Thatcher did not know, was that less than an hour after the crash, Delphine Voss made a single phone call from inside Linden Hall. Her voice did not shake. Her face, had anyone been there to see it, would not have changed at all. It's done, she said simply.
Bring her home.
Bring her home. There was no triumph in the words, no cruelty in her tone. There rarely was. Delphine's particular danger had always lived in exactly that stillness. This was not an accident, and it had not been improvised. Delphine and the woman who would soon take Larkin's place had been planning this moment together for longer than anyone close to Larkin could have imagined. While the country watched a grieving family hold a quiet vigil for a woman believed to be near death, 2 women inside a private estate in McLean, Virginia, were already rehearsing the life one of them was about to step into completely. While Delphine made her plans look effortless, Thatcher spent that night and many nights afterward at Larkin's bedside, refusing to believe what the doctors gently tried to prepare him for. He held her hand for hours at a time, talking to her the way people talk to someone they refuse to lose, recounting small, ordinary memories, the morning she had burned the coffee and laughed about it for a week, the way she hummed without noticing whenever she was nervous. He had no idea, sitting there grieving a woman who was still breathing in front of him, that the version of his wife waiting for him back home would never once hum that same tune, because she had never once heard it. To understand the woman who replaced Larkin, you first have to go back to the day both girls were born. Delphine gave birth to twins, though almost no one beyond her closest circle ever knew it. One daughter was healthy, the other was born with a heart condition severe enough that doctors warned she might not survive her first year of life. Delphine made her decision within days. "I do not put weak blood into this family," she said, and the second daughter was given up for adoption before she was ever given a name by the only mother she would ever biologically have. The girl was adopted by a family named Marsh, comfortable but nowhere near as wealthy as the Voss family, and they loved her in the only way they knew how, which turned out to be by giving her everything she ever asked for. They paid for careful, consistent cardiac treatment that kept her alive well past what doctors had predicted, and somewhere in all that giving, she grew into someone who expected the world to keep handing her what she wanted. By the time she reached adulthood, her recklessness with the family's money had cost the Marshes everything they owned, and she left them the moment there was nothing left to take. The years after the Marsh family adopted her were not the years anyone expected, including Brielle herself. She drifted from job to job, fired more than once for the same reason, an inability to take instruction from anyone she considered beneath her. She let a string of men fund a lifestyle she couldn't otherwise afford, growing bored of each one the moment the money started running thin. For a while, she tried to build herself into some version of an online personality, certain the right brand deal was always one post away. It never came. Where her mother's hunger had built an empire, Brielle's hunger only ever seemed to burn through whatever was already in front of her. It was Brielle who talked her adoptive father into co-signing a loan for a boutique she swore would finally be the thing that worked, the thing that proved everyone wrong about her. The boutique folded within 5 months. By the time the debt came due, the Marsh family had no choice but to sell the house Brielle had grown up in and drain what was left of her father's retirement just to keep the creditors from taking everything else. She did not stay to watch any of it happen. She left the day the for sale sign went up in the yard, and she never once looked back. The discovery that changed everything started small, almost bored. Out of money and out of options, Brielle paid for one of those mail-order ancestry kits, more out of idle curiosity than anything else, the kind of thing a person does at 2 a.m. with nothing left to lose. The match came back to a name she recognized immediately from the society pages, Larkin Ashcombe, a political wife photographed at every fundraiser that mattered. Brielle followed the thread back further, quietly, patiently, until it led her to the one name underneath all of it, Delphine Voss. She did not call right away. For weeks she studied Delphine from a distance, her public schedule, her usual events, the rhythm of her security detail, the way certain doors only ever opened for certain people. Getting close to a woman like that directly was impossible. Getting close to the people around her was not. Brielle spent over a month working a junior aide in Delphine's office, charming him slowly, patiently, never asking for anything too obviously, until the night he finally handed her a number that was never meant to reach Delphine personally at all. Brielle did not waste the opportunity once she had it. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She said exactly what she had spent weeks deciding to say, and nothing more. You don't know me yet, Delphine, but I know exactly who you are. I know you gave birth to twins and kept the one you believed could carry your name and handed the other one away like a return item because a doctor once told you she might not survive. I know you've spent decades building a legacy on the story of a devoted mother who never had to make a hard choice in her life. I wonder how that story holds up once people learn there were 2 daughters and you only ever wanted one of them enough to keep her. I'm not calling because I'm hurt, Delphine. I'm calling because I think you and I are about to be very useful to each other, and I'd rather you decide that now, on your own terms, than have to decide it later, on mine. Delphine did not raise her voice either. The threat itself barely registered with her at all, the kind of thing she had weathered from men far more dangerous than a stranger on the phone. What held her attention was something else entirely, the absence of a single tremor in the voice on the other end, the complete lack of fear in someone who had every reason to be afraid of who she was calling. Delphine told her household security to trace the number and find out exactly who it belonged to before she ever said a word about meeting anyone. Within 2 days, she had her answer. Within a week, she had arranged to see this woman in person, telling no one why. She wanted to see for herself whether this was truly the daughter she had given away all those years ago, or simply someone clever enough to find a story and exploit it. The moment she walked into the room, she did not need to ask. Everything she had ever wanted and never gotten from Larkin was standing directly in front of her, wearing her own face back at her. What Delphine never understood, not even after years of knowing her, was that Brielle had never once called her out of anger. She felt nothing close to grief over being given away, no buried wound about a mother who hadn't wanted her. What she felt, the moment the DNA match confirmed who she really was something closer to triumph. She was the secret daughter of one of the most powerful political women in the country, and somewhere underneath the calculation, a small, satisfied voice told her she had finally hit exactly the kind of jackpot she'd been chasing her entire reckless, restless life. Brielle's temper, unlike her mother's, never stayed quiet for long. Staff inside Linden Hall learned quickly to keep their distance whenever something didn't go her way. One housekeeper later described an afternoon when a delivery arrived late, and Brielle threw an entire vase of flowers against the wall, screaming that she had waited her whole life to finally have things go right for her, and she would not tolerate one more delay from anyone. Where Delphine ruled through silence, Brielle ruled through volume, and the contrast between mother and daughter, calm calculation paired with explosive impatience, made them, in their own way, the perfect partnership for what they were planning. Brielle's appearance made the impersonation easier in public and harder to maintain behind closed doors. She wore Larkin's exact face, but she wore it loudly. Heavy contoured makeup, dramatic lipstick in shades Larkin had never once chosen for herself, necklines lower, and hemlines shorter than anything that had ever hung in Larkin's actual closet. Where Larkin had spent years perfecting a quiet, expensive simplicity, Brielle treated every appearance like an audition, always dressed to be looked at rather than simply seen. The household staff noticed it long before anyone with real power was willing to say so out loud. She did not walk into a room the way Larkin walked into a room. She arrived in it. What sealed Larkin's fate was not jealousy alone. It was ambition. Delphine had spent decades building political influence for the Voss name, and she had come to believe, coldly and completely, that the daughter she had given away would carry that influence further than the daughter she had kept. Larkin's only real achievement in her mother's eyes had been marrying well, and even that, Delphine privately believed, Larkin was not strong enough to hold on to. So mother and daughter, reunited by blood and matching ambition, began planning together, the accident included, long before anyone close to Larkin ever suspected a thing. The person who would eventually unravel all of it was someone Larkin never expected to see again, let alone trust. Her name was Rena Cole, and years earlier, in the hallways of the same private school Larkin had attended, she had made Larkin's life miserable in the particular, relentless way only teenage girls know how to be cruel to one another. Rena had not thought about Larkin in years until the day she found herself working inside Hollis Private Medical Center, the hospital Delphine controlled, taking extra shifts to help cover the cost of her young daughter Iris's cancer treatment. It was during one of those shifts that Rena overheard something she was never meant to hear, a quiet conversation between Delphine and a staff physician named Dr. Holloway about a patient kept in a private wing, never to be listed by name. Rena might have dismissed it entirely if she hadn't, weeks later, discovered something that changed everything for her. Iris's treatment, the very treatment that had kept her daughter alive, had been paid for anonymously months earlier by Larkin Ashcombe, a woman Rena had once treated as an enemy and never once thanked. Rena remembers sitting in her car outside the hospital the night she found out, gripping the steering wheel, finally letting herself cry in a way she hadn't allowed herself to in years. She had spent her whole life believing she owed Larkin nothing, and instead she had been the one quietly carrying a debt she never knew existed. I spent years making her feel small, she admitted later, to no one but herself at first. And she spent one afternoon saving my daughter's life without ever wanting credit for it. That guilt, more than anything else, is what made Rena decide to help her. While Rena pieced together the truth from the inside, Thatcher Ashcombe was beginning, slowly and without yet understanding why, to feel that something about his wife had changed. It wasn't anything he could have explained to another person without sounding foolish. It was the way she held her coffee cup, the way she answered certain questions a half-second too late, as though she were translating them from a language she didn't quite speak. He told himself, more than once, that grief and recovery changed people. He did not yet understand that grief had nothing to do with what he was noticing. He had never been a man who could go a single night without her, not since the day they married, and that had not changed on the surface. He still reached for her out of habit, still wanted her beside him at every dinner and every fundraiser. What had changed was the way it felt when he did. There was a distance now where there used to be none, a fraction of a second of hesitation before she leaned into him, and Thatcher, who had never once needed an explanation for why he loved his wife, suddenly found himself searching for one to explain why holding her felt different. He found himself thinking, more than once, about the way she used to pull him into a slow dance in the middle of the kitchen for no reason at all, flour still on her hands from whatever she was attempting to bake, laughing at her own mistakes instead of hiding them. The woman in his kitchen now never danced for no reason. She performed elegance instead of living inside it, and some nights Thatcher caught himself standing in the doorway, missing his wife while she was still, technically, standing right in front of him. He asked her about it more than once, gently, the way he asked her everything. Are you all right? Is something bothering you that you're not telling me?
Fine, Thatcher.
Every time,
Really.
she answered too quickly, too smoothly, with the same brushed-off reassurance. I'm fine, Thatcher. Really, I think the accident just changed me a little. That's all. He wanted to believe her. He had every reason to want to believe her, but the woman explaining away her own distance was wearing brighter colors than his wife had ever worn, heavier makeup than his wife had ever needed, and smiling in a way that reached her mouth and stopped well short of her eyes. Thatcher did not yet have a name for what he was feeling. He only knew that the woman in front of him kept telling him nothing was wrong, and some quiet, stubborn part of him refused to fully believe her. Rena's path back to Larkin, the path that ended with her leaning down to whisper the truth about Larkin's mother into her ear, was not simple. Getting into the private wing of Hollis Private Medical Center without raising suspicion took weeks of careful planning, small favors, and more risk than she had ever taken in her life. She spent those weeks befriending a younger nurse who held badge access to that wing and eventually convinced her to swap a single shift, just long enough to slip inside unnoticed. When she finally stood in front of Larkin, awake but still weak, she did not waste time on an apology for the years of cruelty between them. She simply told her the truth, plainly, the way only someone with nothing left to lose could. Then, using a private number Larkin gave her from memory, Rena sent Thatcher 4 words that would change the direction of everything. The woman beside you isn't her. Thatcher did not call the number back right away. He sat with those 4 words for an entire night, turning them over the way a man turns over a decision he is terrified to make and even more terrified to ignore. By morning, he had decided on something quiet and deliberate. There was a particular gesture, a private joke between only the two of them, something Larkin had done on their wedding night that no one else on earth could possibly know. On their wedding night, nervous and a little overwhelmed by the entire day, Larkin had pressed 3 fingers lightly against the left side of his chest, right over his heart, and waited until he understood, and pressed 3 fingers back against hers in return. So, we know this is real, she'd whispered at the time, half joking, half not. They had never explained it to another living soul, and they had never once needed to repeat it again, until now. If Rena could arrange a meeting, he would know within seconds whether the woman waiting for him was his wife or a stranger wearing her face. Getting Larkin out of that locked wing took more nerve than anything else Rena had done in her life. She came in one afternoon with a wheelchair and a stack of paperwork for an off-site imaging appointment, the kind of routine transfer staff rarely questioned twice, and a spare set of scrubs folded under her arm. "Put these on over your gown," she told Larkin quietly, locking the door behind her. "Keep your head down and let me do the talking. We're moving you during the shift change, when the guard on this wing is thinnest." Larkin's hands were shaking too hard to manage the buttons at first. "What if someone stops us?" she whispered. Rena didn't look up from fastening the wheelchair strap. "Then I tell them exactly what's on this paperwork, and you stay exactly as quiet as a sedated patient is supposed to be. Larkin, look at me.
Keep your head down.
I am not leaving this hospital without you in that chair." They moved through the corridor minutes later, exactly on schedule. Rena walking fast and certain, Larkin's face turned down and half hidden, and no one on that floor looked twice at a nurse wheeling a transfer patient toward the service elevator. The meeting happened in a back room Rena had arranged, away from cameras and away from Delphine's reach. Larkin remembers her own fear in the seconds before she moved, one thought looping quietly underneath everything else. What if 6 months changed me too much for him to recognize? Then she did it anyway, exactly as she always had, exactly as only she could have. Something in Thatcher's chest finally broke open. He did not shout. He did not demand answers from the empty room around him. He simply pulled her into his arms, held her the way a man holds something he believed he had already lost forever, and repeated the same 5 words over and over against her hair. I should have known. I should have known. It was the first time in this entire story that Thatcher allowed himself to fully fall apart, and he did it in complete silence, the way some men only know how to grieve. Before she had even finished the gesture, Larkin had already pressed her forehead to his, the way she always had, and whispered the 4 words that belonged only to them. Still my favorite room. Thatcher's voice broke completely when he answered her. Then stay in it. God, please, just stay in it. He held her face in both hands for a long moment after that, just looking at her, relearning every detail he'd been forced to doubt for months. Then he finally kissed her forehead, then her temple, before pulling her back into his chest, like he was afraid letting go even an inch might lose her all over again. That same evening, Thatcher went home and quietly asked the woman everyone believed was his wife to press her fingers to his chest the way she always had. She hesitated for half a second too long. She pressed her palm flat instead of 3 fingers, then caught herself and tried again. Something close, something that almost passed, but it wasn't right, and they both knew it wasn't right the moment it happened. Thatcher said nothing about what he now understood. He smiled the way he had been smiling for months, kissed her on the cheek, and walked away already building, in his mind, the case that would end her. From that night forward, Thatcher and Rena worked together in careful silence, gathering everything they would need to expose Hollis Private Medical Center, Dr. Holloway's role in hiding Larkin, and the full scope of what Delphine and her returned daughter had built between them. Every quiet meeting, every document, every recorded conversation moved them one step closer to a confrontation neither of them intended to lose. Delphine, for her part, suspected nothing. She had spent her entire life being the only person in any room who saw every move before it happened, and for the first time, she had no idea the room had already turned against her. Because the Voss and Ashcombe names carried more political weight than personal scandal alone could survive, the exposure did not happen in a courtroom. It happened inside a closed-session ethics hearing on Capitol Hill, in a room usually reserved for matters of policy and influence, now filled instead with evidence of identity fraud, concealment, and a staged accident that had nearly cost a woman her entire life. Thatcher stood before that room and laid out everything piece by piece. The hospital records that never should have existed, Dr. Holloway's own testimony, given once he understood how much trouble he was already in, the private gesture that had confirmed, beyond any reasonable doubt, exactly who the real Larkin Ashcombe was. And finally, the recorded admission Rena had spent weeks helping to secure, proof that Delphine herself had arranged the crash that put her own daughter into a coma for 6 months. Delphine did not raise her voice once during the entire hearing. She sat with her hands folded, her expression unreadable, the same way she had moved through every difficult room of her life. When the woman chairing the hearing finally asked her, plainly, why she had done any of it, Delphine answered without a flicker of apology in her voice. Because some children are born to lead, and some are only born to be loved. I built a name that mattered in this country. I was never going to hand its future to the wrong daughter. It was only afterward, when the woman she had given everything for, the daughter she had finally chosen, turned in her seat and would not meet her eyes, that something in Delphine's composure finally slipped. For one single moment, in front of everyone, her face changed. It was the only crack anyone would ever see in her, and it had nothing to do with being caught. It had everything to do with finally understanding that the daughter she chose had never actually chosen her back. Both women were charged. Identity fraud, conspiracy. Charges connected directly to the accident that had taken 6 months of Larkin's life and nearly taken all of it. Delphine's political career, built across decades, collapsed within a single news cycle. The daughter she had welcomed home, the one she believed would finally make her proud, was sentenced separately and would never again set foot outside the walls she was sent to. Years later, in a detail that very few people outside the family ever learned, the woman who had once posed as Larkin Ashcombe died quietly in custody, her heart finally failing in the same way doctors had once predicted it would, decades earlier, before a mother who never wanted her gave her away. Larkin, when she eventually heard the news, did not celebrate it. She simply sat with it for a long time, the way she had learned to sit with everything that family ever gave her, and let herself feel something closer to grief than relief. Larkin still remembers the one sentence that moved through her that day, quieter than anger and heavier than relief. She never once got to find out what it felt like to be loved without first having to earn it. In the months that followed, Larkin and Thatcher slowly rebuilt what almost cost them everything. There were quiet mornings where neither of them spoke much, simply sat together, relearning how to trust the space between them. The ritual came back slowly, the way most things between them did. The first night Thatcher pressed his forehead to hers again and whispered the old 4 words. His voice shook on every syllable. "Still my favorite room." Larkin answered him the same way she always had, the same way she always would. "Then stay in it." Neither of them said anything else for a long time. They didn't need to. And then, just over a year after the hearing, Larkin learned she was pregnant again, a piece of news that meant more to her than either of them could fully put into words, especially knowing the pregnancy that had been taken from her in that staged crash was a wound she had never let herself name out loud until now. Iris Cole recovered fully from her illness, and Thatcher made sure Rena was compensated far beyond what she ever expected for the risk she took helping them. Rena eventually left the country to begin a new life somewhere quieter, somewhere no one knew her as anyone's enemy or anyone's savior. Before she left, she sat across from Larkin one final time and said the words she had owed her since they were both still children. "I'm sorry for every single year I made you feel small. You spent one quiet afternoon saving my daughter's life, and I spent years trying to take pieces of yours. I don't think I'll ever stop owing you for that." Larkin never forgave her mother, not for the accident, not for the years of cruelty, and not even, in the end, for the betrayal itself. What she could never forgive was simpler than all of that. Her mother had a chance to give her a sister to love, a sister to grow up beside instead of grow up measured against, and she chose, deliberately, to take that chance away before Larkin ever knew it existed. Larkin still remembers the one sentence she never said out loud to her mother's face, the sentence she carries instead, quietly, even now. "You didn't just take my life from me for a while. You took the only sister I ever could have had, long before I even knew enough to miss her." There is a part of Larkin that grieves for the sister she never got to know, more than she resents her. A woman who never felt a real mother's love, who was given away for being sick and welcomed back only for being useful, who died without ever once experiencing what it might have felt like to simply be wanted without conditions attached. Larkin understands, in a way she wishes she didn't have to, that her mother's own broken childhood is the reason any of this happened at all, and understanding it has never once made it easier to live with. She got her husband back. She got her name back. She is going to get to hold her child this time. And still, some nights, she finds herself wondering the same thing she wants to leave you with tonight. If you had spent your entire life being told you weren't enough, by the one person who was supposed to love you unconditionally, and that same person turned out to be capable of all of this, would you have forgiven her? Or would you have walked away the same way Larkin finally did, carrying the weight of an answer she may never fully be at peace with? Let us know what you would have done in the comments below. We upload a new story like this one every single week, so if this kept you watching until the very end, make sure you're subscribed, leave a comment, like this video, and share it with someone who loves a story exactly like this one. Thank you for staying with us through Larkin Ashcombe's story, and we will see you in the next one.